Okay, so I'd like to thank everyone for coming today to the Mixed Methods webinar series presented in part by the Mixed Methods International Research Association as well as the International Institute for Qualitative Methodology. Today our talk will be with Dr. Pat Bazeley, and her topic will be writing up mixed methods studies. So a little background: since graduating in psychology, Dr. Pat Bazeley has worked in community development, project consulting, and in academics research development, both privately and as an academic. This has provided experience with research design and methodology across the social sciences, business, and the professions. Her particular expertise is in helping researchers to make sense of qualitative and quantitative data, and with integrating data with diverse sources and of different types, and of using computer programs for management analysis of data. Pat is past president of the Mixed Methods International Research Association and is on the editorial board of the Journal of Mixed Methods Research and Qualitative Health Research. Research and publications include books, chapters, and articles focusing on qualitative and mixed methods, data analysis, and on development and performances of researchers. Dr. Bazeley, we're very happy to have you here with us here today.
Thank you very much, Yvette. So, you're hearing me okay? Just make sure. Yep. Okay, let's go.
So I'll just stop sharing. Put your slides up.
Okay. So, are you putting them up from your end, or do you want me to put them up from this end?
That doesn't seem to work.
Okay.
So at the top right.
Okay, so we're talking today about writing mixed methods research articles and theses. And I am going to present a view that is not necessarily one that you will hear from a lot of other people. Anyway, let's go. So my key arguments are that integration is the defining feature of mixed methods research. So anything that you write that's going to be called mixed methods, integration has to be a feature of it. And I talk about integration as being around the interdependence of methods. And so having methods working together in a way that's interdependent and which produces as a result something that might not be available by just having the methods worked separately. My key argument about writing in a mixed methods way is that if you keep notes, reflections, conclusions, and so on under topic headings during analysis, regardless of the source or method used, your analysis and your writing are more likely to become integrated. So I'm going to be arguing strongly that as you're working, you work around the topic that you're working with, and the focus always is on the topic more than on the particular methods. So we'll see how that works. There's a few questions that you might think about. The first one is really not how so much as, but is mixed methods writing different from any other research writing? And I would suggest that it is in some ways. It's a little bit more complex because you have more methods to write up and you are, of course, having to integrate them. But in terms of the actual writing, still the key point about writing is that you're building an argument for whatever your conclusion is. So in that sense, it's not different. My critical question in terms of your actual writing is whether you're writing with a methods focus or a substantive focus. In other words, are you writing an article for a methods-oriented journal like the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, or are you writing an article that is focused on the topic and for a discipline or topic-based journal? And that makes a critical difference to how you write. Whether you're writing alone or collaboratively makes, well, it makes a difference primarily in terms of the problem of having to liaise in a team. If you have different people working together in a team, then potentially you have different styles of writing to contend with. And that's something that you need to negotiate between yourselves. It may be that different parts of an article will be written in slightly different ways, and in fact, if you're writing about some of the qualitative outcomes, then you might write in a more qualitative style, but where you're reporting some statistical results, then you stick to a statistical style. And so in a mixed methods article, you could potentially have those different flavors coming through in different parts. The question of who is your audience is, of course, important in terms of the content and style of writing, and that is one that's also an issue not just for mixed methods but for any kind of writing. And perhaps if you have specific questions about that, you might address them. We might address them later. But essentially, obviously, you need to think through whether your audience is academic or professional, whether you're trying to write for policy people or trying to write for, if you're writing a thesis, you're writing for markers. You know, yeah, that's just something you need to consider for any article, including a mixed methods one. So potential problem areas in writing for mixed methods, and I'll raise these first and then try and help you see your way through some of them. The advice you tend to get from some of the gurus in mixed methods is that you write separate questions, you do separate analyses, and you report separately before you integrate, or you report your quant, you report your qual, and then you integrate. I don't take that approach. I believe in integrating from the start, and that will become clearer as we work through. So first of all, I don't believe that there's such a thing as a quant question or a qual question. Almost any question can be answered either way, depending on what data you have available and so on. I also don't necessarily argue that a mixed methods article has to have quant and qual. It just has to have more than one method of, or more than one type of data, or more than one kind of analysis. That's another area where I am not always in agreement with my colleagues. So you can form your own opinions on that one, I guess. Integrating, so another potential problem area which relates to something we were saying before about disciplines, is integrating findings across inter or multidisciplinary teams can be a problem area. As I said, you need to sort out between yourselves what approach you're taking, how you're handling it. Get to understand what how other disciplines see things, or recognize that each discipline has their own way of reporting, and have a conversation about it, and mainly be aware of how other disciplines report, and don't just think that yours is the only way to do it. The question of how much you need to write about paradigms comes up. It absolutely depends on the nature of the journal or target audience that you're writing for. So there's no neat answer to that one. It will absolutely depend on that. What will be a problem is the problem of journal orientations, and particularly journal word limits. And you'll need to be aware, as for any article, as I said, quite a lot of what I say applies to any kind of writing you do. The problem of journal orientations is one of getting to understand or know what the journals are. If you're writing for a journal, what are the kinds of articles that journal publishes, and making sure that yours is one of those. As a journal reviewer, I quite often see articles sent to a journal that are just simply not appropriate for that journal. So you need to check out who's been writing, what kind of things are written, and that's basic advice. The issue of journal word limits is more of a difficult one for mixed methods, because the nature of writing for mixed methods involves writing more about methods and often more about results, and consequently needing more space. And so problems occur where you have journals, for example, that only allow you 3,000 words or 5,000 words. So there's a number of solutions to that, and I'm going to suggest some of those. You may find that you need to split up your reports. There are, incidentally, some journals that will allow for longer articles. You might want to seek those out. Or if you're writing a thesis, it's not a problem, presumably, because you've got plenty of room to write. But if you're in a situation where you need to work to a limited journal length, then the question is, how do you split up a report for a mixed methods project? And the most common answer to that is that you write up the quant side and you write up the qual side, and I'm going to argue that you don't do that, or I am arguing that you don't do that. So I would suggest a couple of things here. One is that you might start by writing a separate methods paper. And the advantage of doing that, if you write up a methods paper about how you went about the research, is that when you write up the substantive articles, you can refer back to that methods paper, and then you don't need to give so much detail about the particular methods when you're writing up the actual results of the study. And there's some articles where I've done that. Particularly ones coming out of a report where the methods were written up in detail in the report, and the report was publicly available. And so I was able to cross-refer to the report for details of the methods, and then just write a summary of the methods in the actual article that I wrote. And that's one way around things if you write the separate methods paper. Another thing that you can do is write an overview of the study, which is a bit similar. So you're giving a sense of the whole study, and then dividing up the topic. And what I'm suggesting is that you divide the topic, not the method. So you don't write the qual paper and the quant paper. You think about what your topic is. What are the elements in the topic? What bits can you kind of hive off into a separate article? Which bits are worth writing about, which aspects of the topic can you write about, rather than deciding which particular method you'll write up. Now, I do make some concessions to that general argument. Sometimes it's necessary to write separately. Clinical trials is an example where often the trial outcome results are available, the quantitative outcome results are available much earlier than the analyses of people's experiences or whatever. So that can be a situation where there's an urgency about getting out a particular set of results, and so they get written up separately. If that happens, then it's still important to write those in the context of the whole study and to make sure that they are placed within that broader context so that people realise that there will be other papers or that there are other papers around the same study. It is also likely that some papers will naturally be based more on one or rather than the other type of data or method. And I have some examples coming up here where out of a particular comprehensive report that I wrote quite a long time ago now, as you can see from the dates of the papers, the original report came out in about 1996. And following that report, various members of the team produced a range of papers, and each paper focused on a particular question and used different aspects of the data. This project had about 6 different sources of data. It had a couple of surveys, documentary data, interviews, emails. Trying to think what else. It had an extensive range of data anyway, and so the papers that were written drew on the data as a whole, but also sometimes focused, sometimes drew more on one sort than the other. But all of the papers were written within the context of the whole study. The main point being that each paper focused on a particular aspect of the topic rather than focusing on the method that supplied the data for the topic. So you come to writing your paper and you think about, okay, what was the purpose of the study? What were the questions you were asking? And if you're talking about writing a particular paper, like a journal paper or a conference paper or whatever, then you need to think about one single take-home message for the reader of this particular publication, or the person who's listening to this particular paper. So there's a key take-home message that you will be presenting. In a thesis, it's a different issue, but potentially you would have a key message for each chapter of your thesis if you're writing a thesis. And again, like the papers, I would argue in a thesis that the chapters will be organised by the substantive issues that they're covering, not by the method, so that you don't have a qualitative chapter and a quantitative chapter, but you think about what's the topic that you're presenting. That provides the organising focus. The topic always, I am arguing, is providing the organising focus for whatever you're writing, whether it be a series of articles or a set of chapters in a thesis or a book. So you think about also, though, how that take-home message, that particular message for that chapter or that article or whatever, fits into the overall context, and make sure that you place it in that context. And then you then you can ask, what data do you have to support that message? So that the message comes first, and then you're thinking about what data, out of all the different methods you've used, what data do you have to support that particular message? So, again, focus on the message, not the method. Consider the audience. And then you need a clear and progressive structure. And thinking about the structure, you think about what does the reader already need to know to understand that the point that you're making right now. And what do they need to know now to understand what's coming next? So these are the sorts of questions you ask yourself as you're writing in order to get some kind of progressive structure in what you're writing. And there are conventions within your discipline that you need to think about, whatever those are. As some general points, I would suggest, these are just hints, if you like, about structure. typically, description will come before comparative and relational analyses, so that you begin, and that's actually good if you're struggling with getting going on writing. It's okay, start with description, and that's easy, relatively speaking. So you can start with the easy bit, the description, and then you start to think about, well, okay, who says this? Do some groups say it more than other, or whatever it is you're writing about. Think about it comparatively, think about it, then that might lead you to thinking about how it relates to other things and so on. So you build towards complexity, but start with the straightforward description. Typically, the general will come before the particular, so you set the scene before you deal with particular issues. Typically also theory before application, although right of that, you could be developing theory, in which case it will also come back round to theory. Again, a few hints about paragraphing, because this is often done badly, and if I'm saying things that you learned in 3rd grade at primary school, then apologies, but I see there's a problem in academic writing often. 1 point per paragraph. So what's the topic of this particular paragraph? Could you give it a heading? I have sometimes sat with students and got them to write a heading for every paragraph in what they're writing, to help them to focus on what each paragraph is conveying. Take them out later, but put them into focus. The topic sentence, usually at the start of each paragraph. The key sentence is at the beginning. So if someone is skim reading, they read the first sentence in each paragraph. That should give them an overview of what the whole thing is about. So topic sentence at the start of each paragraph, and similarly keywords or emphasis at the start of each sentence. You find if you write in that way, it makes it just so much easier for the reader to follow. So these are things not about mixed methods particularly, but about writing in general. And of course provide linking sentences or paragraphs that create flow without forcing. I find it a bit tedious to have, now I am writing a summary, or I will now talk about kinds of sentences. It should flow much more naturally than you having to force it, by saying I will now talk about. If the flow is right in whatever you're writing, then each section will pick up on the previous and develop it, or naturally move on to a new aspect of the topic. As an example of the structure of an article, this was a mixed methods paper out of that particular project I talked about. It's substantively focused, and you can see that the headings, these were the actual headings from the article, and they follow the argument of the paper. So in developing a definition for early career, the first step was to show how a career developed, to provide an overview of career development for researchers. One of the critical issues in that was who out of people who think they're becoming researchers really have research potential. This was for a national grants body that this was being written, so hence they're only interested in people that had very high-level research potential. What were the criteria that could be used to determine who was a likely future career researcher, or who was an early career researcher, and so working towards the definition for early career. So there's a kind of a fairly natural development in that article through to the key point, which was the definition and how status could be developed. Okay, at some stage, of course, you do have to describe your methods, And again, it's a case of move from general to particular. Provide an overview of the approach you've taken to the study, and then deal with the particulars of the kind of data you've used, the sample, and so on. I want to emphasize that you describe what you actually did rather than rely on labels. And this is a particular problem in mixed methods writing because so many of the books have provided recipes, if you like, and labels for designs and so on. It's also a problem in qualitative work that people have labels for methods. The problem is that not everyone understands the same thing by the same label. And so you can use a label or try and apply a label because you think you have to, or because that's the quick way of doing something. And the label doesn't actually convey what you did, or what you did doesn't match the label, or it doesn't provide the reader with enough information. So I don't mind I'm quite happy if there's no labels used at all, none of the conventional labels like this is a explanatory sequential design or whatever. I would much prefer that you actually described what you did. And the reason for doing so, when you're writing about methods, think about it as the key point for writing about the methods is so that the reader can understand exactly what you've done in order that they can see how you arrived at your results. That's why they need to be there. So they need to have enough of your methods to understand how you reached your conclusions. Potentially also so that they can replicate the study, but mainly in the first instance is so they can understand how you reached your conclusions. I'm a strong advocate of using diagrams and tables to present or summarize methods. So a table, for instance, you might list your questions in a table and then have columns that show perhaps the theoretical basis or how you, what data you used to answer that particular question. That strategy is particularly useful in a mixed method study where you may be using multiple methods to answer any particular question that you've set in. I'm thinking here of the sub-questions in your study or the particular objectives or whatever you want to call them, that you'll use more than one method to answer each of those potentially, and potentially any method will answer more than one of the questions. And so if you set it out as a table where you have the questions listed and which methods are contributing to those questions and how, set in a table, then that makes it very clear to the reader, and it takes a lot less space as well if you are short of space. A figure is useful to show sequencing of methods if that becomes important. It is sometimes, it's not always, or to show how the methods are being brought together. At what points are they connecting? So this is often referred to as the points of interface between the methods. The methods will be connecting in the sense there'll be a conversation going on between them pretty much all the way through, or hopefully there is, but there will be particular points where you are bringing them together in some way, and it's often helpful to show that as a diagram. Critically, you need to be transparent and in the sense of describing what you actually did, presenting the methods as used. What did you actually do? In presenting results, obviously integrate. And again, sorry, I'm harping on the same point again. If your paper is substantively or topic driven, then you divide and organize the content according to a breakdown of the topic, not the methods, not the sources, not paradigms. And I would argue that you do that even if your study components were conducted separately or sequentially. let me give you some hints. Okay, before I get to the next set of hints, these are various forms of integration. I won't go into these in detail here. If you want to look at those, you can maybe come back to the PDF or the website when it's posted. Basically, there's a whole range of different ways of integrating data. Conscious of time here now. The kind of strategies of bringing things together are things like juxtaposing statistical and text data, so reporting side by side, or again creating tables where you have data placed. So what do you know about a particular aspect of the topic, a theme? You may have some tables with some themes, and what statistical information do you have, what text data do you have shown side by side, or potentially for particular cases. If the focus of the study is on a small number of cases, sometimes the different kinds of data are shown in a table and then of course discussed in the text, but shown as a table. It's possible also to convey results using different modes of representation or to present alternative accounts conveying different understandings of the same event or situation. There's an interesting article from years ago now that presented a Marxist account and a critical theory account of someone's workday in the one article, and then discussed the two different accounts and what they revealed. Yeah, it was a management article, fairly radical kind of article. But yeah, different modes of representation. Jennifer Green gives an example that a student of hers developed of presenting some statistical demographic data using a kind of a verse, poetic, or verse rather than poetry. I wouldn't dignify the name of poetry, but using some verse to present it. It's just be creative. Let me just go back a step. Those other integration steps. Yeah, that's sequential. Using different methods, interweaving them, using tables. If you put multiple sources of data into a single qualitative software project, then the coding brings together the information from the different sources. This will help you to write it together. Yeah, I'm going to move on again now to further strategies. So use a theoretical perspective is a way of bringing different kinds of data together, using metaphors and narratives as means of integrating ideas, using tables and displays. I think I've more or less covered that. This is kind of where I wanted to get to. When you're writing up, if you create a Word document that you're writing into, create some styles, some headings. So using styles for headings, you can drop your ideas under particular headings, and the styles help you to see the structure and to organize it. So basically, create a Word document that you're going to end up being your article or your thesis or whatever. Pile some headings into it. Any new idea, any aspect of the topic that you want to write about, you put in a heading. Turn on the document map or navigation pane or summary pane, whichever version your program calls it. Then you can see the headings, the point about this is that as you're working on your results, regardless of whether it's the quant data, the qual data, or any other kind of data, as you're working on them and you're getting ideas from your results or bits of information from your results, you're dropping that information under the topic-based headings, then that helps you with the writing up, or it helps you to write it up in an integrated way. So I find that using, having learned to use the heading styles and the document map in Word has just absolutely revolutionized my writing. Although, when I think back, when I did my PhD thesis, it was in the days of writing longhand. And even when I was writing up results then, and it was a mixed methods thesis, I had notebooks and they were organized according to topic, and I was recording evidence from the different, so I was writing up a community study for part of it. It was one section of it, and I had mixed forms of data, and the results from those different mixed forms of data were being put in the notebook under headings for whatever they were about. So that system of, if you're writing your analysis, if you're recording your analytic insights in that way and writing them together right from the start, or recording them together right from the start, that will help you to write a much more integrated article or thesis. Now, some other points about Word, just some convenience things here. Create styles for any repetitive feature you use. So I have styles for every different kind of bullet I use. I have styles for table headings. I have styles for just any repetitive feature at all I use. It's important to learn how to format tables correctly. Learn to use things like autocorrect for repetitive words or phrases. So, you know, CTY on my computer, if I type it, turns into community. Things like that, if that speeds up your typing. Use EndNote or an equivalent program for referencing. I guess that's pretty basic these days. Yeah, so if any of you are struggling with how to use styles and how to use Word tables and so on, I do have on my website a document which it was written a couple of years ago, so it is based on Word 2010. But there's a document on my website that explains how to do things like shortcuts for styles and how to set them up, because I have all mine set up with shortcuts and so on. So and formatting tables and things like that. There's a whole lot of kind of handy hints for using Word. If you go chasing around my website, you'll find it. Okay, so overall, a very simple message for this webinar. Basically, the simple message is organise a substantive mixed methods article around the issues related to the substantive topic. Writing as you go prompts questions that will enrich your analysis. And Laurel Richardson has written in virtually multiple versions of the Denson and Lincoln handbook about writing as analysis, and that's her argument as well. And if you write as you analyse, you will better integrate both your analysis and your writing. So that's my key message. And just to finish off, I have a bit of information about MMIRA, which you can chase up as you need it. If you note the website, you can find it for those of you that are not already members of MMIRA. And a bit of personal promo. This is a book which is currently in production, and it will be published in October, on integrating analyses in mixed methods research. And I think at this point I will stop and allow time for questions. And the slide with my website that someone's asking for already, it's actually the very first one, I think it was.
Thank you very much, Pat. So if anybody else has a question, you can, and if you have a microphone, you can raise your hand and I can give you the microphone. If not, you can just write your question in the chat below and then we can read it out. Okay, so while we wait for questions to come in, there won't be a webinar taking place next month in July. People are off for the summer, but we will be back in August, August 22nd, with Tom Liam Lynch and Hannah Gerber, and they'll be talking about qualitative research in computational times, dilemmas of data gone digital. So the link for that will be up next week for people to register for that workshop, or that webinar in August.
So does this mean there's a question there?
I think there's some people typing questions. Yeah, you can type your questions below, or you can raise your hand, and I can give you the microphone if you want to ask your question yourself. People saying thank you, it was really helpful. We have one from Suman Taraman. Thank you very much, Dr. Bazeley, especially for the advice you gave about organizing our notes throughout the writing process. Your website looks like it has great resources. Thank you.
There is a heap of I've written a lot of articles on integrating methods, and those are available on the Mixed Methods page on the website, on my website.
Okay.
If there's any there that the actual paper isn't linked, then if you write to me, I will send it to you.
Okay. And we will put the slides up afterwards on that website.
The thing about using Word is under the General Computer Use heading on my website.
Okay. And so we have a question from Juan Yepes. How feasible is publish a mixed methods research protocol in a high impact factor journal?
I guess the issue is how well do you write? It's the issue of whether a journal will accept a mixed methods article or whatever is very much to do with whether that journal normally publishes mixed methods, and secondly, with how well the mixed methods article is written. Again, if it's a high impact factor journal that is on a substantive topic, if you focus on the topic, then whether it's mixed methods or not is probably not relevant to the likelihood of acceptance. It's how much you contribute on the topic. So, yeah, I'm not sure that I can give a I mean, it's a matter of choosing the appropriate journal, and choosing the appropriate journal is looking at whose work you're referring to, where do they publish, or where did they publish, and what kind of articles does this journal normally publish. is what you're looking for.
Okay, and another question from Ron. Any recommendations for writing mixed methods research protocols?
I think it's fairly much the same argument as with writing an article, except that you are focusing much more on the methods there, but you're showing how the methods are going to. You're actually having to show how the methods are going to answer the questions you're raising. So it still has a topic focus, but of course in a protocol. I assume by that you mean sort of writing what you plan to do in a thesis or for a confirmation of candidature type thing. Then you're still focusing on the topic, but you're showing how your methods are going to answer that, and that's the kind of that and the methods type articles are the ones where I really suggest using things like the table that has the questions listed and how each question is going to be answered by which methods. As a summary at least, you'll also write text around it, but to provide that kind of table is incredibly helpful for the person reading it to get an overall picture.
And we have another question here from Participatory Design. Thank you so much. I'm going to use Participatory Design survey in usability testing in my PhD thesis. Is this a good way to call it mixed methods research?
Sure. I mean, participatory design doesn't. I'm just thinking that a quantitative survey can still be within a participatory design and still be purely quantitative. So it depends what you mean by a participatory design. And there's no reason why something can't be completely quantitative but still participatory, in that you are involving people in setting it up and doing it. So again, I'd need a little bit more information about what you mean by the participatory design. I would call something mixed methods research if it uses more than one source of data, more than one kind of data, or uses more than one type of analysis on a particular kind of data. But particularly, it's more likely to have more than one kind of data or more than one source of data, and those different sources or different analyses are brought together and worked together. Then I call that mixed methods research. Sequential research is also mixed methods if one method is informing, the analysis of one is informing the design or analysis of another. But even there, I would argue in the writing up that you don't forget the initial form of analysis. So what often happens is that people write up a survey, for instance, and forget to mention, apart from mentioning that they may have done some interviews to help design the survey, they don't record anything of what they learned from those interviews. And I would argue that if it's going to be written up as a mixed methods study, then you would also include information from that preliminary research as part of the writing up, because it helps to explain the results apart from anything else. So hopefully that makes some sense. So I can't give a direct answer and without more information, but hopefully that's given you some ideas for thinking about the answer.
Thank you. And the next one's from Helly and Dart. I'm sorry for not saying your name correctly. Thank you for a great lecture. Can you say a bit more about your view on different methods, types of data, etc.? I remember you said that mixed methods is not only a question about a qual and
okay. Yeah. Some methods are very difficult to define as quant or qual. And so I would argue, for instance, that a survey is as much qualitative as it is quantitative. It's what I call a hybrid method. I think ethnography is a hybrid method. There's a whole range of methods that I would call hybrid. Qualitative comparative analysis is another one. So social network analysis often is hybrid. And methods, some methods are just simply not easily defined as quant or qual. So I guess it's also possible that you have two entirely different quantitative methods. So you might have an experimental method combined with a survey. Put those together, potentially you've got mixed methods, even though people could define both of those methods as quantitatively oriented. And similarly, you can have different qualitative methods, or you can have document analysis and with interviews, or different kinds of methods that might often be both called, might separately be called both qualitative or both quantitative, but in fact they're very different nevertheless. And so combining those is still mixed methods. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. We've got Hiba and Amy Fulton both asking if you can differentiate between mixed methods and multi-methods.
Yeah. Multi-methods, what I call multi-methods is when you end up completely working the methods separately, but maybe write a discussion or something that brings the two together so that they're not integrated. For me, mixed methods need to be integrated during the analysis and in the writing of the results. And if the methods are kept entirely separate until you write the discussion, then you've done a multi-method study, not a mixed method study, in my opinion. Now, I know some other people have a definition of multi-methods that means it's two quant or two qual methods, and they call that multi-methods. That makes no sense to me at all. The way that I define, and I know some other people define it the same way as I do, that multi-methods are ones that are not integrated until you get to the very end point and you write a discussion that pulls the, what you've learned from each one together. And that probably answers Amy's question as well. Just a bit further down. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a couple minutes left. If anybody has any last minute questions, you can raise your hand or write them down.
Okay, Hiba's got a follow-up one, obviously, coming up. Oh, okay. Absolutely, mixed methods can be more than two methods. I have a philosophy about doing research. If I have to research a particular topic, I look for every possible imaginable source of data I can get my hands on. And typically that will be many more than two.
Okay, just a note from Hilly, if anyone comes from Europe, I'd like to say that there is a mixed method summer school in September in Denmark. Look at the MMIRA website. Oh, thanks, Hilly.
There's a number of training courses on offer. If you're an MMIRA member, there's a Sunday night notice that goes out, and it's listing courses in America and courses in Europe, in several places in Europe. So there's a lot happening around. It's really interesting that the Europeans have a quite different flavour to their mixed methods to a lot of the Americans. It's quite different. The Americans are much more focused on typologies and systems and so on. Yeah, it's just a different approach. Okay, I think that looks like it might be it.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead and check out the IIQM website to register for the webinar coming up in August. Pat, did you have any final words before we go?
No, I think I've hammered my point strongly enough. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. Oh, there's one final thing for those that, if you want to see the longer version of this, there's a chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Multi-Method and Mixed Method Research that's edited by Charlene Hesselbiver and Burke Johnson. That came out in 2015, so it's an Oxford Handbook on mixed methods, and I have a chapter in that on writing up, which basically says what I've been saying today, a bit more detail.
Perfect. All right. Thank you everybody for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.